Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to our next interview. I get excited when we talk about various topics. Marketing is near and dear to my heart, running a business is near and dear to my heart, but there are other industries that we need to, as vegans, take over. And there are other industries that we really need to be thinking about as we spread really not only the vegan awareness, but also as we spread our ethics and as we get people to think about the world differently, especially as we're trying to drive change. So, today we're going to talk about investing. We're going to talk about the landscape, what's happening, and also how our guest, Sloane, is making change. How Sloane is really helping people take ownership of their investment, whether they're an individual or a company, or maybe just trying to understand how we can all make sure that the money that we have and the money that we invest go into companies, go into businesses, organizations, funds that align with our ethics, align with what's important to us. I think many of us invest sometimes out of habit. Some of us invest out of, that's what we're supposed to do. We just stash this money away here and worry about it one day when we retire. And I think today we maybe want to have a discussion to think about investment a little bit differently. Think about it maybe proactively, and also think about it with our vegan lenses on to make sure that the decisions that you're making are truly in line with things that are important to you. So let me introduce again and say hello to our guest. Sloane, thank you so much for being with us today.
It is an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So let's dive in. I want to make sure people have the landscape, they understand what you do. And also what you bring to the table when we talk about investment, because investment's such a wide field that I just want to make sure we talk about the piece of the world that you're kind of your playground.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I do, the Invest Vegan is a registered investment advisor. We're based in New York, but we can serve folks anywhere in the United States. Um, and I build portfolios of companies that align with vegan values, right? And I don't just sort of go out and buy the protein companies that we all know, like Beyond Meat and Impossible. I mean, like I was talking to somebody recently who was like, what a lot of vegans do for investing is they buy like, Beyond Meat and weed stocks and just pray. What I do is I sort of start with the full universe of U.S. companies, and I actually look at every one. And some things are vegan in the way that Oreos are vegan, right? Where like somebody made a pragmatic choice at whatever an industrial company to not do cruelty, right? To not do cruelty to other things.
Yeah.
And those companies often don't really get thought about as investment opportunities for folks. Like they sort of get, lost in the chaff. Like, and I'm talking companies that make IUDs and contact lenses and, and cell phone towers and, really innovative companies that are, out here helping us engineer ways around cruelty, right? New kinds of processes. So that's what I do. An Invest Vegan account is a portfolio of stocks that I pick. Those get picked on an ongoing basis with, we have a sort of institutional grade process that I administer and run. I came to the industry arguably when I was like 2. Both of my parents are professional investors. My mom was a bond sales trader. My dad was an investment banker. I was always fascinated with, the company as an organic entity, right?
Okay.
Like, there's these incredibly complex organizations that are doing such cool things. And, we can, in a way, we can find ones to support, we can find ones not to support.
Mhm.
Um, I got my first job as an investment advisor when I was 19 years old. Happened to be 2007. Uh, so I was great timing, June 2007. So I was really on the front lines of that
Mhm.
big bankruptcy of trust, let's say, in the
Yes.
industry, where it sort of came to the fore that there had been all of these structural deceits. Uh,
I love the way you
where
said that.
people had been like lied to about what the risks were of this, that, and the other thing. They had sort of been deluded into trusting people who didn't really deserve it. I in that experience really saw up close and personal how the industry treated people like interchangeable, like kind of cogs, right? And didn't really, take the time to listen to them very well. So I came out of that experience really changed forever, right? Like to have talked to a grandmother who thinks that, an investment that she makes is going to pay for her grandkids' college, and only to find out that it's like, wrapped up in some, toxic mortgage derivative or something like that.
Right.
And so I wound up going to CFA Institute, which is the largest global association of professional investors in the world. It's in more countries than McDonald's, so like literally like 180 or something like that. And what they do is produce a graduate level degree for professional investors. And I joined a team that was focused on kind of highlighting, emerging stuff of relevance to investors. So, this was at a time when sustainable investing was kind of a niche thing. Now I'm sure we've all seen a billboard about it.
Hmm.
But back then it was kind of this weird idea that a couple of people in Vermont had or whatever. um, so I got to really have this really interesting role where I was, without the need to instantly commercialize my research. I was able to really engage with the underlying realities of sustainable investing, what we're able to do as investors, and really like what it looks like to come up with investment ideas. I actually wound up writing a textbook about investment idea generation with my colleague there, Jason Apollo-Voss, who's a very successful mutual fund manager. And that textbook basically is a way of structurally arraying your values and using
Hmm.
them as a lens through which you can see opportunity, right? Because underneath the kind of high level statement that I seek to be a good person and do good things in the world, there are many, many, nuanced statements, right? Like, this is what I think is good. I think it's important that people not take advantage of individuals who are, refugees or in positions of, structural deprivation. I think it's important that, women who have sexual assault claims at their workplaces have the ability to, get their day in court and are not forced to sit in arbitration. So I was really experienced in the process of translating those high level values into specifics, and then using those specifics as a lens to see the investment world. And that really like was such a nice thing to have done when it came time to set up this firm, because it really allowed me to look through the thousands of U.S. stocks, and with vegan values really as the center motivator,
Hmm.
say first this is okay, this is not okay, and then define a new universe that looks, I think, substantially different from what most people at most firms would see as the investment landscape. And I think that it's an axiom in investment management that if you want to perform notably, you have to do stuff very, very differently. uh, and so I was going to do this anyway, even if there were no performance implications, because once you get to the point where you understand that it's murder to operate a slaughterhouse, and murder at scale,
Yeah.
you don't really care what the returns on the slaughterhouse are. So like I built this because I wanted folks like me who don't necessarily have $1 billion to be able to, de-slaughterhouse their investment portfolios. Um, yeah, sorry, I've
Yeah.
been
Oh,
blabbling on.
no, no. No, you're so great. You're so much great information. And I think that's the challenge is for many of us, we don't want to be a part of that world. We have actively made that decision in our lives and, the meals, the where we shop. But what happens is it gets harder in the investment landscape for many of us because we either don't know where to start, we don't know even in some cases, when we're investing, we're kind of investing blindly because we're just investing in a fund. And then often we're just, I remember even when I was in my corporate days and they would say, pick a fund, you just kind of felt like, that name looked nice. And the idea is you really didn't have the information you needed to be able to make these decisions. You didn't have the information you needed to be able to even say, yes, I want to make a change, but what do I change to? And how do I make sure I don't just swap out to the same thing I was in before? Because even to your point about sustainability, sometimes that can get a little bit blurry. Sometimes that can get a little bit challenging. So I don't know if you have any recommendations or advice for individuals that are trying to figure out how to kind of get back in the driver's seat when they're thinking about their investments. And even like you said, when we don't have a gazillion dollars to invest, but it's still important because this is our future.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I when I was setting up this firm, like pretty much everyone I talked to, like all of the crusty investment guys that I know, were like, "Well, what you're starting is a hedge fund, right?" And I was like, "No, no, 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 no. I want literally. We have no investment minimum for a reason, so that folks can like they don't have to be flagellionaires in order to access our thing."
Mhm.
Um, I am partial to my own portfolio that I run. So I would suggest folks hit me up if they're looking for a way to do it. We're on investvegan.org. But there are a lot of good sources out there. I mean, like a big part of our research process is stitching together work that nonprofits and activist groups have done to highlight. I mean, we don't invest in fossil fuels at all, pretty much, unless there's a really compelling, broader sustainability story. But like if a mining or some kind of company is abusing indigenous land or something like that, it takes a lot of work to stitch those databases together. And I hope that before too long, people will be able to go to investvegan.org and like sort of input their portfolio and see what we've excluded from our investment universe and why.
That's
Um,
interesting.
yeah, because we actually have line item attribution on, like we have, I guess 3,500 companies on the naughty list, and we like we know why they're there, right? Some of them are there because they've been routinely ranked like the worst place to work in America, and some of them are there because they do animal testing or are really reliant on furs and hides and leathers.
Mhm.
But we had to create a lot of the databases that we're using. There's not really a plug and play solution. And I think that when it comes to thinking about the full scope of the ethics that are implied by avoiding preventable harm to living things, that's really an evolving frontier, right? Like,
Yeah.
there was a company in our portfolio that I sold after I failed to get any traction with them, because company Exelon is a large nuclear energy company. So you would think that would be great and they would be really progressive and thoughtful. But it turned out that they were one of the largest sponsors of the politicians who put Texas's retrograde abortion law on the books.
Mm.
And I emailed the three women who run their investor relations team, and I said, "Hey, this is unacceptable. I need at least, at the very minimum, a statement from the CEO saying this is bad, or I'm selling the shares."
Mhm.
Um, and that's not the kind of thing that is very easy to keep on top of if it's not your
Yeah.
full-time job.
Yeah.
So and it's also not the kind of thing that's very easy to stay on top of if you own 700 companies, which a lot of investment vehicles are set up to do. The like I think that implementing those principles is really a full-time job. But the good news is I think that there will be more folks like me who are implementing their own version of them before too long, because it just this firm is not incredibly complex to set up or incredibly costly to set up.
Mhm.
And I'm confident in saying that we'll be here 10 years in the future because the economics are solid, and it's personally meaningful to me.
Yeah.
So I think that solutions are proliferating, and hopefully before too long we'll be able to issue an ETF, and people will be able to buy it in their own brokerage accounts. For now, people have to open accounts with our custodial partner, Altruist, in order to access our portfolio. But yeah, I mean, like I think the my big piece of advice is to expect better. Uh,
Mhm.
and not to kind of like have this dull, painful, dissonant thought in your heart that like probably somewhere in your investment portfolio, someone is doing something that's deeply objectionable, right? I think that thought is what keeps good people from investing. And, in my community, I'm a queer trans person, in Brooklyn, and I do stand up, and, I know a lot of, basically starving artists who, don't invest at all, don't save at all. And, are often, doing that, not because, they lack the discipline or anything like that to invest, but it's rather because they don't have a, well-rooted ability to trust in, the
Right.
investment solutions that they have access to. So, I mean, I hope that I can be part of, getting people to have higher expectations.
I
uh,
think that's key because I love what you said about looking at companies and what they're supporting. Because often we may look at the history of a business or look at what a business is and we say, okay, they may be okay to invest in. But as the news changes, as laws change, as a lot of things are being politicized here in the US and really even it's happening across the world, it's so important to make sure we're able to make those adjustments so that we can continue that trust. The
exactly.
idea that we should be able to say, yes, maybe that company from on paper looked like it aligned, but when we look at their current activities, when we look at what they're doing in today's environment, it's different. It's not something we would sign on to. And I think for a lot of people, that's not always how we think of investing. We think of it from the standpoint of like, well, we pick a company and next 10 years or 20 years, we hope it turns out okay. I hope I pick Apple as an example,
Yeah.
20 years ago kind of thing. So it's interesting to have that perspective and to start to think of investment as something that does change, something that's dynamic, and something that reflects the current times.
Absolutely. I mean, and because, I think that like one of the traps that people fall into is they buy companies that have products that they like, but they don't really think about the underlying business dynamics or where they are in the
Mm,
product cycle, and like you don't get extra points for buying companies that, have certain characteristics, just because that you have them. You have to actually produce, returns. And there are characteristics that indicate that, right? That are
mhm,
externally discernible and that, like, in a structured process you can check for,
yeah,
and like, so, I think that it's like I don't really operate the kind of business where I'm trading in and out of stuff all the time. I mean, like, I'm there's an investment firm I kind of have modeled my own firm after, called Tweedy Brown, which is where Warren Buffett recommended, folks invest after he shut down his own partnership in like the 50s. And people who would kind of go visit them, would say that, like, most brokerage firms, you can tell if the market is like up or down by walking around the office.
wow,
And at Tweedy Brown, you can't even tell if the market is open. Because like because I think that if you give into the vicissitudes and the volatility and the randomness of the markets and allow it to define your analytical process, that's a trap. But at the same time, like, you can't expect things to hold constant. Nothing ever does.
yeah,
And like the thing that I would say about eliminating stuff based on principles is that, like, maybe twice out of literally 3,000 companies that I've weeded out for this reason,
mhm,
have I been like, darn, I really would have liked to invest in that company.
mm,
It's like,
yeah,
it's never a compelling opportunity. It's always like Exelon was like, they're great. They're the country's biggest, clean energy source or whatever. But, I had questions about them, and they were a small position in the portfolio as a result. And, I was sad to sell them. I was sad to sell them for the reason that I sold them. But I think the portfolio is better off without them, especially as their values became clear.
yeah,
As you know, so I think that, like, when it comes to the broader theme, which is idea generation using vegan principles, like, I think, like, you know the media, the like the kind of mainstream discussion about making a principles based or making an ethics first, which is how I think of my own process, decision, is very quick to sort of imply that you're giving up a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I see it much more as like saving a lot of agita. Because like if you're trying to be, relatively chill in the way that you think about the future, you need to have that baseline level of trust. And if you can go, okay, I mean, I have a 2.5 page single space list of things that companies are not allowed to do in order to be in our portfolio. uh, and I'm constantly adding to it.
Yeah.
And like if you can go, okay, well, at least none of these things are happening. Like, none of my investments are like profiting from, the exploitation of personal data through surveillance capitalism. Like that really helps you rest easy,
Yeah.
and helps you do the thing that you need to do as an investor, which is stay invested.
Yeah.
Uh, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. I really like that. And I like the idea that it's almost back to what you said earlier about that creativity, being able to kind of look through the lens and look at these businesses a little bit differently. And also, I think it goes to some of our principles as vegans. I think sometimes the myth of being a vegan is that you have to give up this and you can't do this and this doesn't happen. So then it's almost like that myth can spread into other things like, well, that means you can't invest in this and you can't invest in that. But I think people forget that there's so many new companies that are started. There are a
yep,
lot of thriving businesses that are just maybe not names that kind of fall off our tongue, but they're sustainable businesses, strong businesses, good businesses out there that, if someone's willing to do the work, which, clearly you're doing for us, they can be found and there can be gems, there can be opportunities that we may be able to uncover if we stop looking at the traditional stocks that are problematic and we struggle with and we feel frustrated about. We kind of push those to the side and maybe look at things a little differently. And maybe even through your creative lens, we might see businesses that delight us. It might be a plethora of opportunity. We might see it more as, a place where there's more choice than we ever realized because we're now looking at it differently.
that's exactly like basically hit on like my biggest ambition for this firm, which is to help people imagine themselves as part of something much bigger than they currently see. Because like I think that in that the hypothetical vegan I alluded to earlier, who's like buying stock in Beyond Meat and kind of like praying, um, might think that there's one or two businesses out there that align with their values, when in reality there are thousands.
Yeah.
And it like the fact that like the middle-aged folks and in management who are trying to conform to investor expectations and not really trying to be activists, like haven't gone out and labeled the business as vegan, doesn't mean that building affordable housing is any less important. uh
Absolutely.
and like so I think that there is a real, I don't know, like back of my mind, front of my mind, center of my heart, kind of thing here where I hope people can, look at the companies in their portfolio and go, huh, I never thought about that. Like I never, it never even occurred to me to think about cell phone towers as a vegan business opportunity.
Yeah.
Like, when, here are these things that are doing such amazing work, bringing connectivity to people, creating economic opportunity in rural spaces, all sorts of great stuff, um, and, just because it doesn't have anything to do with the protein trade.
Yes. Yeah, because that's the thing. Even as vegans, sometimes we can fall into our own a little bit traps of thinking, protein, of thinking even the food track as our only option. So I'm so glad you said that. And one thing I guess I want to throw out is I know for some people, when they hear the word investment, it kind of makes them hesitate. They get a little nervous because they're like, I'm trying to pay my bills here. I don't
Yep.
really think that I have that money sitting to just invest. So I wanted to mention your podcast because I'm also thinking that sometimes the opportunity for some of us when we're thinking about investment is it isn't necessarily let me go grab my checkbook so I can write a check. it's preparing ourselves for that future, for those thoughts. It's preparing ourselves and sometimes shifting our mind around how we should be investing, when we should be investing, where do we start, even if it's small. And I'm wondering, maybe just let everyone know about your podcast, but I'm also curious if your podcast helps people through that process, because I often feel like, the things we don't know, we sometimes shy away from, as opposed to, especially as vegans, we really should be getting educated so we can get more comfortable. So when it's time to write that check, we can confidently do it.
Yeah, I mean, so my podcast, thanks for mentioning it, is Free Money with Sloane and Ashby. Obviously, I'm Sloane. Ashby is my friend who happens to be a professor of investments at Stanford, actually engineering school, which is really cool. So, in his day job, he helps like really innovative companies that are coming out of Stanford, kind of match themselves with innovative sources of capital. And I think that like one thing I would also highlight in that investment journey is it's not necessarily about what you do with your own personal resources. It's also about the resources that you can acquaint yourself with as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And like I think we have had some folks on Free Money who are helping people build savings capability, and Ashby did a lot of like dissertation work on that.
Mhm.
Um, but in particular, I guess there's a startup of his I should plug called Long Game, which is basically it's designed to replace the lottery for people who are regular players of the lottery, and having their savings behavior effectively destroyed by that. They can instead play Long Game, which has lots of great lottery type games, and it actually gives you cash prizes very similar to the lottery, but it's a savings account that's FDIC insured. Uh,
That's
you
interesting. I
know,
haven't heard of that before.
yeah. So I mean, like, I think that that's sort of emblematic of a type of thing that we talk about on Free Money a lot, where it's a company that's sort of engineering a new way around an old boundary.
Mhm.
And like I think that we reach like a pretty crunchy mix of like chief investment office. I mean, like we've had the chief investment officers and CEOs of like some of the largest pension funds in the world on there. But we also reach like a pretty solid audience of Zoomers, uh, and so like one thing that we try to do is make like these incredibly like arcane high level topics that people are engaging with in this sort of rarefied world of institutional investing like a lot more accessible and less shrouded in kind of pretentious mystery. I wish that we had more resources available actually to help people with that building capability thing. It's a real I spent a long time at CFA Institute involved in our investor education efforts, which
Mhm.
had us partnering with stock exchanges around the world and regulatory authorities and stuff like that to help people build those savings practices. And it is the purest form of a hard problem.
Yeah.
Because it like money intersects with literally every social issue that you can possibly imagine. And I think the most important message that I have relevant to that is there's a lot of morality that gets wrapped up in the messaging about money, like saving good, debt bad, you know.
Mhm.
And like I think that the industry really needs to get over itself with regard to that, because we just have this incredibly toxic tendency. I mean, you'll see articles like how I paid off my, or how I managed to buy my own house at 32 by living with my parents. Oh yeah, I just got a small $500,000 loan from my parents, and then I bought my own house. Isn't that amazing? Shouldn't I be celebrated? The like, I think that what we need to do as an industry is get much better at listening to people as they are and like helping them no matter how much money they have, find faith in, at least an ability to, save that money, have that money later.
Yeah. Yeah. And I talk a lot about this for entrepreneurs, because I think some of us have sometimes little toxic relationships with money. Like
I have
we,
no idea what you're talking about.
something happened, or something did this or that. And because of that, we kind of carry that baggage with us. We are afraid to do certain things we don't trust. It makes it very difficult for us to even manage, money in, relationships, whether it's with partners or whether it's with, family members, you know what I mean? It just starts to kind of ooze into all our financial decisions. And therefore, we either can pull ourselves away from it or turn it into the evil thing and turn it
Yeah.
into the thing that's like, oh, it's the problem. And the reality is that money is just a thing. It's really how we
Exactly.
use it, what we do with it, all those things is what creates those issues. So I think sometimes it's also healing. It's us kind of as individuals saying, yeah, we had some challenges, maybe something happened, but how do we want to manage our money moving forward? How do we want to have that understanding? What kind of relationship do we want to have with our investment, our retirement? What do we want our savings accounts to look like? How do we feel about good and bad debt, or what do we consider it for ourselves, not just on the headlines, like you were saying? And I think the more and more people who start getting comfortable with the discussions about money, I think all of our futures can be better.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's this great John Steinbeck quote that Americans are all temporarily embarrassed millionaires. And like I think that really gets to, I mean, like my own family was, like my dad was probably the only Harvard Business School graduate who couldn't get a bank account for a while because, we went like profoundly broke that's why I got a job at 19. It like, I'd love it to be entrepreneurship, but I needed money. Um,
Mhm,
but yeah, like I think that, there's so much shame wrapped up in money and so much like valid, like in the entrepreneurial community, it's like, oh, I just got this funding round from this person, and aren't I, so handsome and smart, versus on the flip, like, well, there's a glorification of kind of self-deprivation and a lack of self-care that comes in that community. Whether it's like the stereotype of sitting around and eating ramen until,
mhm.
somebody, the invisible hand of the free market recognizes you as a person of value.
Yes,
Um, and
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, I think healing is the right word for it. That's very wise. It's very wise to frame it that way.
Absolutely. I definitely think there's so much opportunity for all of us, and sometimes it's about taking that first step. So I'm hoping some of our listeners today take a step and maybe check out your podcast, subscribe, and start to open up their minds or think about things a little bit differently. I'm hoping today's session was inspirational for some people out there, or maybe got them thinking a little bit differently about investment and also thinking about it through, our kind of vegan context and how we can do things differently, how we can be creative, and how there's a land of opportunity out there. So I'm really hoping that was a big takeaway for our audience. As we're wrapping up today, is there any other takeaways, inspirations, or words of advice that you'd like to share with people?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think I've learned, over the course of setting this up is like, I had been kind of like, I guess in a way waiting for the industry to evolve to a point where it would have a place for me
Mm,
to do this. I kind of, there are a bunch of like Sloan-sized holes in walls in various places where I've been trying to like run through the wall and get this thing to happen. Finally, I just sort of decided that I could make my own space. And I would really encourage people to, like give themselves the benefit of the doubt and, you know, see if you are straining against a stricture of some sort, whether, you're in, an industry that, perhaps is not the most innovative, like finance, or you're, just kind of trying to figure out what to do with yourself. I think that it's important to, have that baseline self belief and, ability to go, I will make my own spot. And I think that if there's anything that's, helped me do this, it's that. So I hope that if anyone hears anything, it's that, that exercise of, just kind of creating your own place in an industry that you would like to be a part of. I hope more people do that because I know there are a lot of good people out there, like me, who might have been waiting on the sidelines.
that is wonderful to say because Sometimes, yeah, we hope and we wish and we're looking for those opportunities, and sometimes, there's a chance and there's a space for us to maybe, like you said, fill in that gap and jump in. So I'm so glad that you did. I'm so glad that we had a chance to chit chat today. Let's give everyone a really quick, before we wrap up, your website, social media handles, all the ways that they can get in touch with you.
Oh yeah. Well, it's investvegan.org is the firm. And it's a pretty simple, like if anyone wants to open a conversation, they can schedule an appointment with me right on there, or even just fill out the intake forms to get started with opening an account. And we're at investvegan on Instagram because I'm very creative, and Twitter as well. And I'm at Sloane Ortel on everything, including Instagram and Twitter and all those things. And I would be delighted to have some new vegan friends hang out with me on the socials.
All right, all right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today,
Thank
spending a little
you
bit of
for having
time.
me. It's been a delight.
Yeah, this was wonderful. I really, really appreciate it. And I also appreciate everyone out there who did join us live. Anyone has any questions, if you have questions afterwards or later on, feel free, just post them in the comments. We'll come check them out. But we also appreciate you folks out there that might be listening as a podcast as well. It's so great to be in your ears for a few minutes. And I think this is such an amazing topic for all of us to be thinking about, considering, and really starting to understand that there's opportunity out there for us as vegans. And there's also space we may have to elbow our way through at times, but space for us as vegans to show up in every industry. And I'm really glad that we talked about it specifically for investment today. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sloane, again. And
Thank
we're going to wrap
you.
up today's podcast. And I hope to see everyone on the next one. Goodbye.
Bye.